permanent fund dividend that has your Social Security number, right? That sends you a 1099, sends one to the IRS as well, to tell them how much PFD you got. Well, as a tax attorney, I, of course, follow the Commissioner of Internal Revenue and the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, who's partnering with whom, besides the states and various federal and state agencies, international governments. For what purpose? Data, exchange data, share information, data collection. Is it starting to make sense here how that's going to work? So, okay, of course, domestically, now we see the permanent fund dividend that sends your income information to the IRS is now also linking your school information. So now we see how Secretary of Education can track what classes you took, what grades you got, how much you're making now as an adult. But the international aspect is a little bit interesting. So this came out right before my speeches up in Fairbanks and Elk Junction. This international data exchange program. So it's pursuant to international treaty. Now, we have treaties with different governments on exchanging data. And then, of course, this is the UN, United Nations Independent Expert Advisory Group. United Nations. No one should be invisible. This is the world we want, a world that counts, where everybody is registered. And in fact, we have about 15 years left before they want their proof, legal proof of registration of all individuals. Anybody in here have home births? Did you have the government agent right there documenting that? You came up to Alaska so that the United Nations could track you, right? Is it starting to come together here with this? How all of this data exchange and tracking, why these tests are so important to these people? Because, hey, they're implementing these international treaties. There are also some First Amendment U.S. Constitution religious freedom concerns. Anybody recognize that church? It's not too far away from here. Anybody? Any takers? Yes. Great job. The Milchik. The Common Core is aligned with humanism, which the Supreme Court and the circuit courts have held to be a religion for purposes of the First Amendment, religious freedom, and is promoting humanism, which you'll see in the handouts. Some of the interesting aspects are, it's our duty to obey just laws. And what do we do if the laws aren't just? Apparently we disobey them, I guess. Now, there's a big difference from obeying a just law or disobeying a law you consider unjust, and refusing a test because it violates your constitutional rights and is therefore unconstitutional, and the Supreme Court says because it's violating the 10th Amendment, it's null and void. There's a big difference between these two things. I don't feel like obeying that law, which is promoted by the humanism that's in the Common Core, versus saying, hey, the Supreme Court has said that the government may not do this, and anything they try to implement to do this is null and void. Huge difference. One is the rule of law. One is lawlessness. And what we're seeing is lawlessness on behalf of the executive branches of both the federal and state governments versus the rule of law. And as John Adams said and wrote into the Massachusetts Constitution, we are a nation of laws and not of men. Our Constitution guarantees us due process. The only way that we have liberty is by following the rule of law and due process. And that's not being done now by certain government actors. Well, under the Constitution, the Alaska State Legislature has a duty to establish and maintain a system of public schools. And we see now that the U.S. Department of Education wants to shut down certain schools if they don't meet their marks and so forth. That's, again, not following the rule of law. It's the state legislature's duty to establish and maintain. So what about curriculum? Should the state legislature then say, we're going to use these textbooks in the schools here in Anchorage and Eagle River and Matsu? What did President Jefferson say about that? Remember, the Constitution says the legislature of the state must establish and maintain a system of public schools. And it's my understanding that all 50 states have constitutions that have a similar provision. Does that mean that the state legislature is writing the curriculum? And they're also running our businesses, right? No, even Jefferson said it's the parents within each ward, because remember the Supreme Court has held, and U.S. Congress has passed 3 laws that say it's the parents' responsibility to educate their children, and the states should help them. This is a Supreme Court case. In this one, it was after World War I, the legislature wanted to outlaw the teaching of German in the schools. It went up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, no, the children have a right to learn what they want to learn. The teachers have the right to teach according to their conscience, so to speak. And the parents have the power to control their children's education. So, again, local control. Local control. The parents whose kids are in the schools should be dictating what and how is taught in those schools. Because nobody cares more about your child than you do, right? So remember the word subversive again. We've seen all these violations where it's basically against the law or against the Constitution to do this. How about the subversion? And remember, without the Constitution, we don't have what? Freedom, and also, where are we? Liberty, freedom. But where are we if we don't have a Constitution? Just on some dirt somewhere, right? UN territory. Not Alaska, not the United States of America, without those 2 constitutions. Because again, the Constitution creates the government. Just like if you don't have articles of incorporation, you don't have a corporation, right? Or your LLC, you have to organize with articles of organization, otherwise you can't touch your LLC or your corporation, can you? You only have that piece of paper. Same thing, we can't really touch the United States of America. What makes this dirt, Alaska and USA, the 2 constitutions. So anybody who attacks the Constitution is attacking what? The country. Well, it's good to know that the Second Amendment gives certain people. Anybody here in the militia, by the way? Okay, so nobody in here has any guns, apparently. That's what's taught in Common Core line curriculum. What does the Supreme Court say? Do they agree with it? Citizens. It's an individual right, and it's granted by the Constitution? No, it's guaranteed by the Constitution, or protected by the Constitution. Big difference. So, the supreme law of the land, as interpreted by the Supreme Court of the land, says one thing. The Common Core line curriculum says something quite different. That seems pretty lawless to teach something that is the opposite of what our highest court has said. This comes from New York State Common Core aligned curriculum. So if anybody here actually made his mortgage or rent payment and bought the clothes you're wearing, I don't know why, because you have a human right to that stuff. You don't have to go out and work for it. That's what they're saying here. United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, taught in our public schools under Common Core aligned curriculum. And you can even participate if you're in an Alaska school or any other state. You can participate in the Model United Nations to learn to wear the blue helmet and run the world. And if you go onto that website that describes the Model United Nations, they talk about how they promote world peace and everything. It's been around a lot longer than I've been around. It started right after World War II. How's the world peace been since World War II? Again, contrast that to our first organic document. Remember, U.S. Congress declared that the Declaration of Independence is our first organic document that creates our country. And it says we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not a piece of paper, not the United Nations. And why do we even have government? Why did we then have first the Articles of Confederation, then the Constitution? What's the purpose of government? To secure these rights. Not to give us rights, but rather to secure the rights we already have. So remember the question at the beginning: what is the purpose of education? Because there's a huge worldview issue going on. The promoters of the Common Core have a certain worldview. We've seen some of the reflections of their United nation's philosophy, that they're going to give us rights to health care and housing and food in exchange for our submission to their will, versus our Creator giving us rights and us organizing a government to secure those rights. Well, if John Adams were in the room today, what would he say? Would he be promoting the Common Core? He'd be freaking out. Principles of freedom. Interesting. How do you learn principles of freedom? By studying the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, or by studying the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Which one promotes freedom? How about Noah Webster? Anybody know who Noah Webster is? Webster's Dictionary. Yeah, very good that you know that. Excellent. He's the father of traditional American education, the early American education, Blueback Spelling, the Dictionary of American English. Why did we have American English versus, we had the Oxford English Dictionary already, right? What's the difference? We saw rigor, stuff like that, how they're different definitions, right? Well, if you're under a monarchy, a lord means something quite different than it does to American, right? Words mean a different thing depending on your worldview, depending on your form of government. This last one is quite important, I think, now. One of the things, so virtue and liberty again. Inviolable attachment to world government. For our own country. Remember, love your neighbor as yourself. Who's your neighbor? Your nearest neighbor is your wife, your kids, your husband if you're the wife, your family, then your community, right? Your own country. We are all neighbors here. We live in the Anchorage area. And again, why was Jefferson in favor of universal education? To promote liberty, right? If you don't have citizens who understand their rights, their duties, because remember, every right is a duty. Your right to free speech is actually your duty to control your tongue, to speak the truth, to not use your tongue to harm people, right? So if everybody is raised to know their rights and their duties, society works a lot better, doesn't it? And without the education, liberty can't be universal. Contrast this now to the view of the federal executive, U.S. Department of Education. Remember, this guy was in charge of Chicago school systems before he became the head of the U.S. Department of Education. The same people who came out to the Arizona schools when I was a little child and started changing the schools in Arizona, they were from Chicago. They were moved out to Arizona to infiltrate the schools in Arizona. Now we have them up at the federal executive. What does he say education's about? Liberty, knowing your rights, knowing your duties. What sticks out there? Workforce, economy. It's all about money, because we know that the more money you make, the happier you are, right? That's the goal in life, is to get really rich. Still, I'm 0 for, 5 now, or 10, I don't know. Every time I say that, I can't get anybody to agree. Gee, I don't know. How does he do it? How does he get people to agree with that? And besides, it's about more than education, though. It's about social justice, all right? So anybody whose house is worth more than a certain amount, you better, start giving away your rooms for free to other people. Anybody have more than one car? We'll let you leave your keys here so that we can distribute to people who don't have a car. That's social justice, right? Everybody should have the same. And remember, if everybody should have the same, where does the tide even out? Does the tide even out at high tide? Yeah. And where is the United States compared to the rest of the world? Well, we've been high, right? And now that's why we have to come down. Which Dr. Milgram, when he spoke in Anchorage back in December, he said the purpose of these math standards, it's his conclusion. Remember these math standards on the Common Core that after 4 years, the students have irreparable harm. The purpose is to bring down America and thereby bring up the rest of the world. To find that common ground. The common ground